Matthew Holt here with a THCB Spotlight, and I'm talking today with Kuldeep Rajput. Kuldeep is the CEO of Biofourmis, a company which probably a couple of years back no one had ever heard of, but it's now done quite a lot in the intervening time. And Kuldeep, we met last week. We were both in Germany, but suddenly I'm in the UK and the old world's gone, as you can tell by the architecture behind me, and you're back in Singapore. Is that right?
Yep, back in Singapore for a couple of weeks and then back to Boston.
All right. Well, we'll talk a bit about sort of your global expansion with the company, but to lay the groundwork, just for those people who don't know, tell us what Biofourmis does. Just give us the overview of your role as a company, essentially using biomarkers and sensors to do health management. So tell us a bit about that.
Yep, absolutely. I started the company three and a half years ago, and Biofourmis started with a dream, and the dream was, can we predict disease before it happens so that we can improve health and outcomes, right? Every one of us knows a loved one, directly, indirectly, who has suffered from a complex chronic condition. Would it be beneficial to predict that earlier? And that's what has, really driven us and the team for all these years. So essentially what we do at Biofourmis is, how do you take a known pharmacotherapy and combine that with a digital solution so that it can synergistically act together on patients to drive meaningful outcomes? And the real goal there is really being able to drive health economic benefits and clinical outcomes by being able to predict and prevent serious medical events using physiology analytics. So we have built a platform, what we call as BioVitals, which has three main key pillars. Look, the first one, which is patient-facing components, which has two modules, being able to capture data from patients both actively and passively using sensors and mobile app. The second pillar is our predictive analytics. So we have built, over 300 different analytic modules, which essentially has the ability to predict exacerbation in patients well before they become symptomatic, and then use our treatment algorithms to actually intervene, which is essentially therapeutic intervention, the right dose to the right patient at the right time. And the third pillar completes the whole thing by providing, the care pathways and tools for clinicians, healthcare professionals, the nurses to intervene. So essentially, we have built a pipeline of different therapeutic areas. Heart failure is our lead product, but we have a range of, therapeutic areas, including pain, oncology, coronary artery disease, which would be rolled out in the next 12 to 18 months.
Great. So you're doing a lot. You told me you were a PhD student at MIT and then dropped out to pursue this. What were you working on, and what was the kind of inspiration behind getting into this whole area? And then after that, we'll talk a bit more about how this area is developing. But how did you start?
Yeah. So I was at MIT. I was actually a researcher working on a bunch of stuff. Working on a platform for arrhythmia detection. Was working on analytics in partnership with Mass General for sleep apnea detection. And then I moved to Singapore, where in fact I started my PhD in neuroscience. So spent 2 years doing animal experiments. I was working on building brain implants for neuromodulation for treating Parkinson's disease. So killed 200-300 rats, did animal experiments, but sometime in the journey and a couple of years later, started Biofourmis, took a bold decision to quit my PhD, coming from a family where from education and teaching, it was a tough decision, but the most important thing was when I was back at MIT, there was this whole new proliferation in the healthcare industry. As you know, all these bulky sensors, what you put on patient's body costed thousands of dollars, are now costing hundreds and soon tens of dollars and getting commoditized. Huge amount of data, but there is a very limited way how people are leveraging that to solve the whole continuum of healthcare ecosystem, managing patients, and there was a whole unmet need, and the timing was right. I had built strong relationship with large health systems and pretty good feedback, and I had to make a decision to quit and start the company.
Right. Well, I'm sure your parents are still withholding, your family withholding judgment on that. We won't discuss too much the South Asian stereotypes about their parents, about their kids becoming doctors and scientists and engineers. But you seem to be doing okay so far. All right. So let's dive into this a little bit. You're announcing earlier this week an acquisition in the sensor space to really increase what you guys do. So tell me about that, and then tell me how that's adding to what you've already done.
Yep, absolutely. So if you look at the whole BioVitals ecosystem and the three key pillars which I mentioned, our core competency at Biofourmis is how do you build a platform which has great user experience for the patients to capture data both actively and passively. And then the core at what we do at Biofourmis is how do you process that data and make it understandable, actionable to both the patients as well as the providers. And when we started the company, we were a device-agnostic, platform. We had integrated over 20 plus FDA-approved CE marked medical wearables, which have the ability to capture multiple streams of physiology data, all the way from patches to arm-based sensors to wrist-worn. And we were very much focused on one thing, which is not flooding patients with multiple sensors. One single sensor patients wear on their body and forget about it, and we are still able to capture all relevant biomarkers. We have run multiple clinical studies, in fact, over 7 studies and 10 by end of the year. And what we realized was, the form factor and the data collection or the data quality from sensors, Biovotion device, the Averion device had the most superior quality in terms of data, as well as the compliance rate amongst patients was over 85-90%, even with 65 years and above, because that's the target population we are targeting, as compared to a patch where we used in our first study where the compliance rate was less than 15% over the whole 30 days monitoring. The strategy for Biofourmis is we want to own the whole ecosystem of the platform, which has the right sensing capabilities, the data collection capabilities, both actively and passively, have the right analytics platforms and treatment algorithms to intervene and manage these patients out of hospital. The Biovotion acquisition is an important step towards having an ability to own and access data. They by far are the best clinical grade sensor out there with a very strong IP portfolio. They have over 60 issued patents globally, which covers and dominates essentially the entire wearable space in terms of sensor and data acquisition for multiple physiological parameters. A couple of big 4 tech companies tried to acquire the company a few years ago because of the power in the IP. And since we had already been working with Biovotion for almost more than 2 years now, it made a strategic sense to bring the 2 companies together. And that was the decision factor behind getting the company. So as part of the deal, we acquired all the assets of Biovotion, including the team. So we would have a Biofourmis AG, our office in Zurich, where all the employees would be working moving forward.
All right. And for those, what's the ad for that sensor compared to the other? Did you have a sensor before, or were you just using other people's, or is this now an ad? And tell us a bit more about the form factor of the new sensor, or of the Biofourmis, so the now Biofourmis AG sensor.
Yep, absolutely. So far we were leveraging different sensors, right? Third party, we never were in the business of making sensors. And our strategy was, instead of building, we wanted to acquire. And the sensor which we, the Biofourmis AG will own and manufacture is an armband. So you strap it on your arm, non-invasive, and just wear and forget it. And the device has the ability to capture around 20 different parameters. The device is already medically approved by European authority, which is CE. It is approved in Australia. It is approved in Singapore, and it's currently under review by the FDA, which should happen by early next year. So, patients would get onboarded on a program. They would just strap on the device on their arm and forget about it, and all the data is captured passively.
And is that going to work for, you mentioned several areas. I know you earlier on were talking about pain. You're obviously doing heart disease. I assume there are others. Is there any area that this doesn't cover, or is this basically one sensor to rule them all?
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, Matthew, because one of the important consideration for us was if we wanted to choose a sensor, we wanted the sensor has the ability to capture all the parameters and biomarkers which could tailor to different therapeutic areas in our pipeline. So we would essentially use the same sensor for cardiology, pain, oncology, and even respiratory, which is down in our pipeline. But one single sensor would have the ability to capture all these biomarkers.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about how you're using this. You just announced a deal with Novartis also this week. Give us some sense about who's paying and what are they paying for. The two obvious areas here are sort of people running clinical trials. I assume the other area is people doing therapeutic programs for people either pre or post or instead of surgery. Doing a lot of it. Doing a lot these days about this concept of digital therapeutics, which may or may not exist as far as I'm concerned. But tell me about where are you fitting in, where you see your expansion going on, especially with this new contract with Novartis.
Yep, no, absolutely. The contract with Novartis is a major commercial rollout across Asia. And to just take a step back, if you look at the main problem with heart failure patients, if you look at the stats in the US, which was published a year ago, less than 1% of patients with heart failure are on optimal dosage, and less than 20% of patients receive guideline-directed therapy. And that results in 1 in 4 patients back into the hospital within 30 days or 100 billion in wastage. So what BioVital's HF, our lead digital therapeutics product, essentially does, it's a prescription software to augment guideline-directed use of heart failure medication and have an ability to predict exacerbation and prevent them. So it's a 12 weeks program. Patient gets enrolled. Patient goes home with a kit, which essentially has a Varion device and a mobile app access code. And he's prescribed on traditional heart failure drugs as the patient would be prescribed in general setting. The patient would go home, strap on the device, start wearing the sensor. All the data would be streamed to our analytics engine, which is cloud-based. We would use our FDA-approved BioVital's analytics engine to process these multiple streams of data and pick up physiology changes precursor to heart failure decompensation. And once that is detected, we also use our treatment algorithms to recommend dose optimization, either dose up titration, down titration, medication switches, and that information is streamed to the clinician on a mobile app as well as a dashboard for nurses to manage these patients. So essentially, the whole outcome of the program is how do you put patients on the right appropriate therapy and the right dosage while having the ability to intervene early by predicting these exacerbations well in advance so that clinicians can manage them better. This partnership with Novartis is a fantastic opportunity for us because we are tying this with one of the important brands of Novartis for heart failure called Entresto. So patients on Entresto would be enrolled onto the program for a 12 weeks. It's a bundled program post-discharge. Monitored for a 90 days or a 12 weeks program. And the entire goal, as I said, is how do you drive lowering in hospitalization, ED visit, and dose optimization. So we would start in Asia, in 6 countries in Southeast Asia. So every heart failure patients on Entresto or heart failure drug would be enrolled onto the program. And then we would scale the program eventually to the US by early next year.
Great, and that puts you in the bucket of sort of the digital therapeutic post-hospital readmission area as
Exactly.
well.
Yep.
Are you also looking at the clinical trial, sort of remote monitoring space for clinical trials there as well? Or are you
Yep.
staying in the post-market phase or both?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with pharma, we have three kinds of business models. The first one is clinical trials. So we license out our platform for clinical trials, either it is phase 2, phase 3, or even post-market. There, it's a licensing play plus per patient cost. The second model, which we are super excited and keen, is companion therapeutics. We get into the partnership with pharma companies way early in the drug development process, which is technically phase 2 or even before. And we build a digital therapeutics or a companion therapeutics with the specific drug. And once the drug is approved, it goes through phase 2, phase 3, and once it's approved, the pill cannot be prescribed without our platform. And that's the indication and the label. And there we get X% of revenue share. And as the drug scales, we scale. And soon we will announce our first such a kind of partnership with a large pharma company. And third is what you see with Novartis right now. It's post-market and patient access. Very much tied to commercialization. And that is interesting because pharma companies essentially want to work with companies and products which actually affect their bottom line. So if you can actually show and demonstrate that, they're super keen while driving patient safety and outcomes, because the model which we are using in Asia, because in Asia, Novartis pays a subscription-based per patient per month cost, while in the US, once we scale it, it would be a different model where we would actually be bundled with the heart failure bundle to large health systems. And in the US, Novartis drug, for example, is reimbursed based on outcomes. And if they don't actually show reduction in hospitalization, they get a pay cut for the drug price. And that becomes interesting for us because we then, with our platform, are essentially able to drive that outcome for them. And that technically affects the bottom line.
Great. Well, I'm going to end with two questions. The first one is sort of the general one. So you and I were both at the Frontiers conference last week. A lot of discussions about this concept of digital therapeutics and kind of where the companies who are doing that go. Do they continue working with pharma? Do they end up becoming part of a health plan or a national health insurer on the Europe side, or do they end up becoming providers themselves? If I was to, if we're going to wind the clock forward, and obviously this is speculation, what do you think Biofourmis looks like in, say, 5 years' time after this area of integrating drugs, or in some cases replacing drugs with these digital programs and sensors ends up going? What kind of, do you think you look like a healthcare provider, or do you think you look like a technology supplier to others? What's your guess?
Yeah, so I think, we are a technology company, driven by data and analytics. So, 5 years down, our strategy right now, as we grow the company, is to focus on pharma, because that's where we get early revenues, access to a lot of data, but we have already started, advanced discussion with payers. Our 2020 strategy is focused on payers. We are going to sign nationwide large contracts with some large payers in the US and manage their pool of population. But 5 years down the lane, as Biofourmis today, we are focused on not building monotherapies, but we are focused on building companion therapeutics or combination therapeutics, which essentially always ties with the drug. Maybe, 5 years down the lane, there might be opportunity where we might be able to combine these two. As I said, one of the business model of combination therapeutics with pharma companies, which could also involve payers, and that's the way we would scale.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting moment in sort of figuring this out as these things get more real and the pharma companies and the payers start getting more interested in this. Great. Final piece on the company. As you said, you started just a few years back in Singapore with, I assume you and the dog and a couple of small team. You raised a big chunk from Sequoia, right? Was it in the middle of last year? The middle of this year, sorry, we're still not out of this year, right? 35 million, about 40 odd million going so far. You just pulled off this new merger here with Biovotion. give me a sense about, are you now, you're in Zurich, Boston, Singapore, and probably India and elsewhere. Give me a sense, how many people, how fast are you growing in terms of people and revenue contracts? And I assume at some point you need to go back to the well for a bigger check if you're going to grow this thing even more globally. Just give me a sense about where you are as a business.
Yep, absolutely. So as you said, we are in 4 locations right now. We are headquartered in Boston, but we have office in Singapore, Zurich, and India. In fact, the Indian team just was established we made an acquisition of one of our software partners in India, where we now have around 30 plus employees. So the total company size today after the acquisition of Biovotion is around 120. And the main goal for us, we have been revenue generating since 2017. In fact, we have done 4 times of our revenue what we did last year in the first 3 quarters. We certainly will do a next fundraise sometime 2021. But now we are well capitalized. We have inflows of revenue. Of course, the company today, after the acquisition, is valued close to 500 million. We plan to do a larger fundraise by 2021, provided we, have proper goals in terms of certain milestones we want to hit. And once those goes through, we will do a larger round of over 100 million and hoping to reach unicorn status soon.
I like it. It's the big bet theory, and I think we were talking to several people last week. It seems to me that in this area, the goal has to be to grow relatively quickly, because if you're going to, now the health plans and the pharma folks are interested, and there was a panel on this last week at Frontiers, they're going to expect to scale with people who have some scale. It's going to be tough to do it from a small position. So you're in it to win it, as they say.
Yep. No, absolutely. That's
all right. Well, I know it's late at night where you are, and I really appreciate it's always a bit of fun when you're doing an international video conference when you were standing next to each other last week and didn't quite get the camera out. But I've been speaking to Kuldeep Rajput. He's the CEO of Biofourmis, which is doing a lot in this sort of digital therapeutics plus space, in the sensor space. And looking forward to seeing how you continue this, and congrats on the acquisition and the partnerships, and looking forward to seeing how you can do this next year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay. Bye now.